back to the period before World War I. As we all know, wars before World War I had no air dimension. Wars were fought between armies and navies. And it was in World War I where we first saw air forces employed by the fighting forces in Europe. Then after the war, this is in the 1920s and the 1930s, this is before World War II, we developed independent air forces. And those air forces became very interested in strategic bombing. And strategic bombing is another way of saying long-range bombing. And the idea was, this was of course popular in the air forces of the world and among Air Force thinkers, that an air force by itself could independently win a war. In other words, you would no longer have to win that war on the ground or at sea. You could just take your air force and you could hit the other country's homeland. You could hit its economy, you could hit its population, you could hit its military forces, whatever. And you could bring that country to its knees with air power alone. And in a very important way, we tested this in World War II. And we have tested this theory many times since. Now, there's still some people who believe you can do magical things with strategic air power, which again is another way of saying with air power alone. But the fact is there are real limits to what you can do. There's no question that you want to have a powerful air force if you go to war. And there's no question that in some cases strategic bombing helps win a war. But strategic air power by itself cannot win a war. It just can't. The historical record is unequivocally clear on this. So, when you go to war against a country like Iraq in 2003, you definitely use air power. You remember shock and awe. That was the American Air Force pounding Iraq before we sent the ground forces in. Strategic bombing came before the ground forces went in. But the fact is, to create regime change and win a decisive victory in Iraq, we had to use land power. We had to send in ground forces. We couldn't do it with air power alone. Fast forward to the present. This is a campaign where we have no boots on the ground. There's no land power. And we're talking about doing it with air power alone. We're talking about doing it with strategic bombing. This is what the decapitation strategy in the opening stages of the war was all about. And when people now talk about going up the escalation ladder, when you talk about Pete Hegseth announcing that we're going to punish Iran more today than we have in any of the previous 11 days, what they're saying is that we're going to win this war with strategic air power, with air power alone. We don't need ground forces. Well, the historical record, again, is unequivocally clear on this. You can't win wars, especially against formidable adversaries, with air power alone. It just doesn't work. So here we are in a world where we have no boots on the ground, and President Trump does not want to put boots on the ground. I mean, serious boots on the ground. Are we going to conquer Iran the way we conquered Iraq? I don't think so. So, of course, the end result is that we're relying on strategic air power alone. And what are we going to do? We're going to punish Iran like it's never been punished before. There's no question about that. You turn the American and Israeli air forces loose on Iran, they're going to do an enormous amount, they're going to inflict an enormous amount of punishment, do an enormous amount of damage to Iran. No question about that. But again, the historical record is clear that countries can absorb that punishment. Look at what we did in World War II. Look at what we did in Korea. Look at what we did in Vietnam. You can inflict massive punishment on civilian populations, and the countries fight on. And in terms of military targets, we're not going to get all those ballistic missiles and drones. They're going to continue to fire ballistic missiles and drones at Israel, at the Gulf States, and at American military assets. So strategic bombing is not going to produce a decisive victory here, in all likelihood, unless there's a miracle. And I don't believe in miracles. I hope I'm wrong. I hope this war comes to an end. But I don't think it's going to happen. And I think the historical record is on my side. So when Pete Hegseth and President Trump, talk about escalation dominance and pounding Iran more than ever, don't believe that's going to work. It hasn't worked in the past, and there's no reason to think it's going to work now.